Kansalaisina saamme helposti vain pintapuolisen käsityksen politiikasta, sillä media keskittyy usein henkilöihin ja päivän politiikkaan. Ohitammekin helposti päätöksenteon taustatyön ja toimijat, jotka tutkivat ja tulkitsevat yhteiskuntaa. Ajatuspajat tuovat nämä ihmiset yhteen, vahvistaen siltoja tutkimuksen, julkisen keskustelun ja päätöksenteon välillä. Sosiaalidemokraattisena ajatuspajana Kalevi Sorsa-säätiö kokoaa yhteen yhteiskunnallista asiantuntemusta, jonka avulla voidaan rakentaa hyvinvointivaltion tulevaisuutta. Edistämme yhteiskuntapolitiikkaa, jossa yhdistyvät vapaus, oikeudenmukaisuus ja tasa-arvo. Analyyttisenä edelläkävijänä ratkaisemme tämän päivän ja huomisen ongelmia.
So that was our introduction of the foundation. But good morning to all of you and warmly welcome to this discussion, Western Balkans EU enlargement in the shadows of COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis. My name is Jelena Simić. I am a project manager in Kalevi Sorsa Foundation, and our foundation has had a democracy support project in the Western Balkans since 2008 with the support of our Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and our project is implemented by our local partners in Albania, North Macedonia and Bosnia. And our project has two elements: political academies aimed at future decision makers in Bosnia, Albania and North Macedonia, and then a series of seminars for local think tanks which aim to strengthen their capacities and bring them together to discuss common issues and debate common regional challenges. Before we get started, I would like to thank the European Network of Political Foundation. It serves as an umbrella network and information hub on topics related to democracy and development cooperation. And I would like to thank them for the support for this event, and also the publication Has COVID-19 pandemic moved the Western Balkan countries closer to or further from the EU, which was published in December, and we'll be discussing today as well. The publication was written by 6 country authors from the Western Balkan countries, experts, and from whom we have one here today, Jelena Simić from Kemal Stafa Foundation. And the publication can be also, you can find it here, and also it can be downloaded on our website. And then a bit about the agenda. We have regional and Finnish experts discussing how the pandemic, war in Ukraine, and now the energy crisis have affected Western Balkan countries and their whole enlargement process. And what can the Western Balkan countries themselves, the EU, and also Finland as a member state do to help to mitigate the various effects these crises have caused in the Western Balkan societies. We will first have the speakers speak individually, and after that we will have a panel discussion where you will also be able to ask some questions. And unfortunately, Pilvi Torsti, she could not make it, but we will have Finnish ambassador to Serbia, North Macedonia and Montenegro, Kimmo Lähdevirta, joining us for the panel together with Irfan and Legion and Brendan. So if some questions come up during the speeches, write them down and you'll have the opportunity to ask them later. But now, without further ado, I will give the floor to Jelena Simić. He is a director of a Tirana-based Albanian think tank, Kemal Stafa Foundation, which aims to spread, develop and consolidate the values of democracy, human rights and freedoms. And he will be talking to us about the democratic developments during the pandemic and the findings of the report.
Thank you, Jelena. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Kalevi Sorsa for all the support and the government of Finnish that is giving to the region, because one of the main important topics right now is the cooperation between countries in the region of Western Balkan countries. Even that I would prefer to be in this panel speaking for something more better, but we are in this situation, crisis after crisis, and we have to face those. So I'll speak for one of the latest situations, world situations related with COVID, which even that it's still a present one situation, we have had so many developments in the world, so there are even two other things happening right now. So this panel, I think that will discuss too many hot topics, and we have to face with those in everyday life. Regarding the situation in the Western Balkan countries, even that in many cases we treat this region is very diversified, and even between us all the time we consider it as unique. But when it comes to this crisis, we are part of the whole world. So even the measures that have been taken in these countries have been followed to many other measures that are done in other countries. I'll start the presentation just with some analysis of the situation before and after the COVID, but first of all, I'll stop to the starting point of this COVID pandemic. In all the region, it starts approximately in the same time, so starting in the end of February till mid of March, have been registered the first cases in the whole region of Western Balkan countries. Regarding the cases, in the region, there is a big discrepancy when it comes even to compare to the average of the EU. We have some of the countries like Albania, Bosnia, North Macedonia, Kosovo, which have a low number of cases, and other cases like Serbia and Montenegro. The case of Montenegro is even higher than the average of EU. From the other cases, when it comes to the deaths, again, there is a big discrepancy between countries. In the low ratio, there is Albania and Kosovo with a smaller number of deaths per 1,000 inhabitants, 1.25 and 1.78 in Kosovo. And there are other cases that are even higher than the average of EU, like, again, Bosnia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. Which brings us in a situation that the diversity of the COVID has been different in these countries. But what is important is the vaccination, because when it comes to numbers of cases, it has to be said that even the methodology of register changed from one country to another, and that brings even this discrepancy, big discrepancy in the numbers. But when it comes to the vaccination ratio, we see that the countries are all in a low level compared to the EU average. Here is the cumulative vaccination, so it means first, second, third, and so on by each country, where we see that the countries stay too low compared to the average EU countries. And what is important to be said is even when it comes to the cumulative cases in the second and third vaccination, in these countries the situation was a bit specific because mostly it was a kind of obligation for those that travel outside, that is social inclusion to be vaccinated. At the first one, okay, it was seen as a social inclusion, but after that people feel, because in the region, at the beginning it was a fear about this pandemic, as everywhere in the world, but after that it seems that it passed a bit faster than the effects of the pandemic. So even the affection of the society regarding the vaccination, it stops almost to the second vaccination, and they didn't follow the third and more vaccine. For this reason, you see that all the region has a much more lower ratio of vaccination, cumulative one for 100 inhabitants, compared to the average of EU. There are even cases between the countries in the region, like Bosnia, that has much more lower vaccination ratio compared even between the Western Balkan 6 countries. But regarding to the topics that we have to discuss today, so the impact of COVID to the democracy, I have presented some of the main indexes just to understand where this country stays. Regarding democracy index and freedom index, press freedom index, first of all, I have to say that in overall average, the world has a decrease regarding the democracy index. Regarding the 6 countries of the Western Balkans, we have 2 specific cases, that is Albania and Montenegro, which have had a positive index even during the pandemic years, while the other countries, there are no data for Kosovo. I have to mention that there are no data for Kosovo in this index, but for 3 other countries, it seems that the pandemic has had direct impact. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia and Serbia, we see in 2020 a decrease in the democracy index, and let's say a shift or going in the same level after the 2020, because it can be explained even because the pandemic situation or all the restrictions taken during the pandemic was mostly used in 2020, and in 2021 approximately all the sectors and all the activities comes to the normality. I'm saying approximately because there are some cases like education or universities which postpone a bit the physical participation, but in general all the activities came to the normality in 2021 in these countries. Regarding the Albania and Montenegro, the positive ratio of this index can be explained with the election process which has been done in 2020 in Montenegro and in 2021 in Albania, but in 2020 in Montenegro was considered as positive one. While regarding the Albania, why it seems to be like that is because one of the components of the democracy index is the civil liberty, which in Albania during 2020 has shown a very high level of points. So this is the reasons why it seems like that. But in 2021 and 2022, we'll see a much more decrease in Albania in case of freedom index because of some of the developments that had happened during the time in Albania regarding even with the fake news or misinformation coming even during the pandemic period from different medias. So going back to the press freedom index, here most of the countries has shown a decrease during the pandemic, and this is strongly related even with the restrictions that has been taken to these countries during the pandemic, which covered all journalists, all NGOs, so nobody was allowed during this period, especially during 2020, in the beginning of 2020, nobody was allowed to do their job. And this brings, in this situation, in whole of the countries. The only exception is the case of Bosnia, which has been considered, in fact, one of the best countries regarding the law environment for freedom of the media in that period, and this is even the reason why it seems to have a positive impact. But when it comes to the analysis, even in Bosnia there have been too many restrictions even to the journalists in that time. Going in more details, so approximately this is a macro analysis regarding the main indexes in the country of Western Balkan countries, when it seems that the pandemic has had direct impact in many dimensions, not only in the health situation in the countries, but even in many other dimensions like economy in these countries, restriction of movement of the people, the restrictions in the work of journalists and media in general. So all these impacts have influenced even in the democracy in this country. Going in more details, we analyze some main pillars. Even in the report you can find some of these conclusions. Some of the main pillars regarding the impact that has influenced democracy in this country. The first one is related with the restriction of activities. So during this period, especially from March, all the countries passed in the emergency situation, and they pass even in drastic restrictions, where in some of the countries there were no movements at all. In all the country, no one was allowed, especially for a period of 3 to 4 months, no one is allowed, including even journalists, which had a big influence in the information distributed to the people. And in many cases, this infected even in the misinformation of the people. So it was created even from the social media, even from different media, local media, the information used was not realistic, and it becomes even because the institutions in these countries stopped cooperating with medias or with journalists in that time. They didn't give information, and sometimes they even had created some barriers to the media not to publish information. And all of that impact a lot the democracy of these countries regarding the right of the information. But from the other side, it has to be mentioned that in some of the countries, the population accepts this prohibition of the right to movement. In Montenegro, for example, the study done in that time shows that 97% of people agreed to have this prohibition of right to move, just in the favor of the health. But in other cases, like in Serbia at the beginning, and after that even in Macedonia, there are even cases of protests of people because they didn't agree with the measures taken from the government regarding the restrictions of the movement. Another pillar that has been impacted was the judicial system. It has to be said that in all countries, in the beginning, all judicial system stopped working. Some of the countries tried to start the court online, which again it was not so efficient in the beginning because even the infrastructure wasn't prepared. The online infrastructure wasn't prepared in these countries for these situations. But even in those countries where they start to have this kind of online meetings, again they were most focused only in some specific cases and mostly related to the COVID-1. But there are even cases like Albania, which try to do kind of Council of Ministers decision to postpone all the activities, which it was a short solution in that time. But overall region during this period face many problems regarding the judicial system, postponing many of the judgments. But what is important to be said is even that in a way all the cases related to COVID tried to be hidden and postponed, and in one way never has been studied or analyzed, let's say, by courts. Another important topic is related with the politics. This region, I don't know how many elections have been in 6 countries during the pandemic year, but in each of them for sure one. In Albania we have in 2021 the general elections, which for the first time we had even the e-voting and e-counting in only Tirana Chark. We do an experiment to that, which in fact was a successful one. I don't know if we are going to the other elections to the whole country, but that has its risks. But even because of the COVID situation, we try to test this e-voting and e-counting because there were too many restricted rules in that time. There are, in other countries, we have some postpones regarding in Bosnia, in Macedonia. They planned to have the elections in 2020. They did it, but they just postponed the period. And there are other cases like Montenegro, which I have to say that is a specific one. They changed the government in that period, but 2 governments followed completely 2 different lines regarding the pandemic. The first one, restrictions everywhere, but it has a big impact in tourism, and Montenegro has a very strong correlation between tourism and economy of the country. So the second government, or the government that comes later, they changed totally and they open the borders to the tourists. Even that had a big impact. And if you go back to the cases, Montenegro was one of the countries with the highest ratio of cases and deaths during the COVID. So generally speaking, even during the pandemic period, the countries succeed to have elections, local and general elections, only with some postpones, and all the elections were done in high restricted rules regarding the COVID, and the participation ratio was lower. Even that has to be said. Specifically is the case of Albania, because we are in a situation that for the moment all municipalities are only from the left party, because the opposite left the parliament in 2018, and they didn't participate in 2019 elections, which brings the left party in 2021 to have a majority of the MPs. So they are one party in the power. But from the other side, it brings a lot pressure even to municipalities, the elections this year, because we are going to in the May of this year, we are going with 60 municipalities from 61, which are left parties, and they have big pressure, because I think that it cannot stay like that, the situation. So it will go to change regarding the numbers of left and right representatives in the municipalities. Okay, the other pillar is related with civil society. Civil society at the beginning was in a chaos, because all their activities stopped just because of the restrictions. And some of those that were more proactive, they changed the activities and they start to work regarding the COVID situation. But in general, it has to be said that the civil society has been active in these countries regarding even some, let's say, changes that they did regarding the measures taken from the government. I'll take the case of Albania, when the government during that time tried to put some very strong measures, like 15 years of prisons, 10 years of prisons in case of just breaking the quarantine rules. So, which was too heavy measures, let's say, at the time. So the civil society has been too active to change this situation. From the other side, another thing that has to be said is even that in some cases the government funds was stopped to the NGOs until they change the activities in the support of COVID. So again, we have a postpone of the activities and change of the activities of the civil society. Media was one of the most influenced too, because there were different typologies of influences. From one side, there were this kind of misinformation given to the media, which transferred to the people, and in some cases they created a chaos. But from the other side is even the case where the media didn't have access to the documents. They didn't have cooperation with the public institutions, so they didn't have information to share with the citizens. But it has to be said that in Western Balkan countries, they play a significant role to the information of the citizens, because in many cases the government institutions didn't produce information for the citizens, because especially at the beginning, because they were even afraid of the situation, how the situation was going on. But sometimes even to the data or the information, but especially the data of the cases, was used even for the electoral situation regarding the elections process in these countries. And to stop in some specific national features taken during the time, in Albania, directly after the first case registered, it was created the emergency management groups, which was in administrative unit. Albania has 61 municipalities divided in 373 administrative units, which are not by law. There are only administrative one. In each of them was created directly an emergency group, which has doctors, police, civil society, and so on, which support the elderly groups and those with different disabilities. But another specific one is that the armed force come in the roads in Albania to support the police, because in the beginning people were not respecting the restrictions taken for the government, especially not in big cities but in the other regions. So the government put even the armed force in the street. In other countries, some of the specific cases, it's related, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they had to had three emergency declarations, so in each of the regions, let's say, so federation, state level, and the Republic of Srpska. In Kosovo, in general, was followed only the decision making from other countries in the region or in Europe. In Montenegro, I mentioned that specific was the case that two governments between before and after the COVID, they just changed the policy regarding the restrictions. North Macedonia had mostly so in Macedonia the restrictions brings the increase of violence in the society. So they had an increase of numbers in the violence cases in the society, and one of the main groups that was influenced from the pandemic was the Roma group. And in Serbia, one of the main politics that Serbia followed in that time was to have many vaccinations. So they provide 5 vaccines in the country, but it is specific that the vaccine was given to all citizens, foreigners, and tourists in the Serbia. So they had the possibility. They had the possibility to distribute and to support even the countries in the region regarding the vaccination. So I'm stopping here because Jelena is saying me time after time. So thank you very much, and we'll have the time to discuss even after the other presentations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Legion, for this very detailed insights on the pandemic and its effects. Our next speaker is Brendan Humphreys. He's a senior researcher at the Aleksanteri-Instituutti of University of Helsinki, and political historian and anthropologist, and he has a special interest in Eastern Europe and especially the Balkans region. He's currently working in 2 Finnish academy-funded projects, one of the prison system of the former Yugoslavia, and then the second on population displacement in Ukraine. And his recent publications include book chapters on Russian and Serbian relations and the linguistic choices of Balkan writers, and several pieces of the war in Ukraine. And he will be speaking to us about the war in Ukraine and regional responses to it.
Well, good morning, everybody, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies. First of all, I'd like to thank Jelena and the Sorsa Foundation for inviting me to speak with this very distinguished panel this morning. Unfortunately, I do not have any PowerPoints, and I'm going to do something I can't stand, which is basically, I wrote down my comments and I'm going to read them, which is very dull indeed. The one thing is I don't think I'll take up all of my time. But I would like to generally touch on a few issues, and I think that the panel here will have more insightful comments on them when we get to the discussion. These would be, in no particular order, EU enlargement, which now links the Western Balkans with the war zone in Ukraine in a kind of technical way. We'll be speaking about the security situation on the continent since February of last year. The situation particularly in the Western Balkans, most especially 2 particular flashpoints, no surprise what they would be, Republika Srpska and Kosovo. I would like to say something about the present stage of Serbian-Russian relations, something also about Hungarian-Russian relations, and there's a special mention for Bulgaria. I don't know if we have any representatives of Bulgaria here today. I'd like to speak a little bit about the challenges of democracy, though nothing like the detail of our previous speaker. And finally, to go back to actually the core question, have there been any significant learnings from the crisis? When it comes to historians learning from history, a lot of very dull things have been said over the years. That, do we learn from history, or we learn that we do not learn from history, and so on. It's a bit too early in the morning to give you what is a rather dull historian's debate on that. So let's assume we actually can learn certain things and move forward from there. Firstly, as regards EU enlargement, Bosnia being the third country after Ukraine and Moldova to be granted candidate status over the last 6, 7, or 8 months. In December last, Kosovo also applied. Given that its independence is not recognized by 5 EU members, and given, of course, the open question of Kosovo's independence and its disagreements with Serbia, that will be a long and difficult process, surely. It's suddenly as if all the war zones, past and unfortunately present, thinking of Ukraine, have been put in one basket and left at the gates of Brussels. And that is what I meant by the kind of technical connection between the Ukraine and the Western Balkans. It would be fair to say that the war has certainly fast-tracked Ukraine's application, and one cannot help wondering if that application was sincere and on merit, rather than a fully understandable gesture of solidarity with a country under a brutal attack. To speak about the Balkans more specifically, in January of this year, the president of the Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, honored the Russian President Vladimir Putin with the Order of the Republika Srpska. Dodik has visited Putin as recently as last September in Moscow. He has been involved, I think, in some rather dangerous brinksmanship, trying to undermine Bosnia's certain institutions, even speaking about a separate army, highly provocative, I would have thought, speaking about a separate tax system and so on for the Republika Srpska. He has stated that the Ukraine war has delayed what he has called his breakaway plans. That is, he has been openly talking about secession from the rest of Bosnia and is supported in this, not surprisingly, by Moscow. Even if this is only talk, it is very dangerous talk. It seems to me that Mr. Dodik seems empowered by the present crisis in Ukraine, and this has enhanced his political opportunism. Now, there is one, unfortunately, very negative lesson to be learned, that opportunists will exploit crises for their own political agendas. As regards the second flashpoint in the Balkans, Kosovo's Prime Minister Kurti has said, I quote, "I think that the major concern is precisely this. Now that Russia has got severely wounded in Ukraine after its invasion and aggression, they have interest in spillover. They have interest in outsourcing their warmongering drives to the Balkans, and where they have a client who's in Belgrade. If nothing else, this is a reminder that relations between Belgrade and Pristina are strained, and there's nothing particularly unusual in that. The recent tensions have been over car license plates, and that is the nationality displayed on the car license plates in Kosovo. Anybody familiar with the Flags and Symbols Act of Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland politics would know that such symbols matter very much in conflict situations. Even if they seem trivial, even if they seem even absurd to outsiders, they matter in those situations. The Kremlin, looking out for Serbia as usual, has said that it wants, and I quote, he wants the situation to be resolved, the situation in Kosovo to be resolved through diplomatic means. But they stand for ensuring that all the rights of Serbs are guaranteed. But I would like to pose the question, is Moscow really looking out for Serbia in this? The assumption that Russia will always support Serbia is a seemingly deep-rooted aspect of Serbian consciousness. I am, of course, speaking very generally. Serbia, like anywhere else, is full of multiple different voices and contradictions. However, if one looks at the actual historical record, I think this is not quite the case. If one examines over the longer period the history of relations between Serbia and Russia. So I'm sorry about this. This is going to be a short, boring history lecture. I feel really bad about this. There's a couple of ex-students in the room, and they have suffered enough over the years. Anyway, the document by which you could say the blueprint of Serbian statehood, this will be very familiar, Sasha, the 1844 Nacrtanja, written by Ilya Grashinin, was in fact deeply suspicious of Russian intentions. Gerashinin even went so far as to say that the Russians would be more oppressive of the Serbs than the Ottomans were. Very unusual statement for a 19th century Serbian statesman. To use a later example, in 1908, Austria-Hungary formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, and this caused much displeasure and much bitterness among the South Slavs. There was no help at that point coming from Russia. Indeed, the Russian Foreign Minister Volsky said, I quote, "You Serbs, you cannot dream of chasing Austro-Hungary by arms out of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We cannot wage war for these provinces." More damningly, Volsky himself had proposed the annexations. The Russians proposed the annexations that led to so much bitterness in the South Balkans. Of course, that anger caused by the annexations would feed into the anti-Austrian resentment that would cause the famous assassination in Sarajevo in 1914 and provoke the global disaster thereafter. Not much of a friendship there. To bring these things up to date, if we look more recently, Serbia has openly cooperated with NATO, which of course, NATO bombed Serbia in 1999. It's been a big step to actually cooperate with an erstwhile enemy. Some 20 years later, Serbian armed forces have carried out, I believe, 17 cooperative exercises with foreign forces. Now, my information is from 2018 or 19. 13 of those operations have been with NATO. Only 4 of them have been with Russia. So much more actual military cooperation of Serbia with NATO than with the traditional ally, or the seeming ally, Russia. In 2020, Serbia hosted NATO's what's called DEEP workshop. It's not that sexy, actually. DEEP means Defense Education Enhancement Program. This took place in Belgrade. Admittedly, this was 2 years before the current invasion, and it's worth stating again that the war in Ukraine did start in 2014. I must mention that to his credit, President Vučić has recently asked the Wagner mercenary group, who are very active, very brutal in Ukraine, to stop trying to recruit Serbs to fight there. That said, on the other side, there have been Serb volunteers fighting in Ukraine already back in 2014. And if we look at economic relationships, Russia's investment in Serbia is quite minimal. It's only 25% of Austria's investments there. Yet the assumption that Russia will always be somehow the guardian of Serbia has lasted. Vučić said recently, I quote, "I hope we'll be strong and respected enough that everyone will always appreciate and respect our relationship to the Russian people and to Russia. We cannot change ourselves on this issue." This is a strange statement. There are, I think, professionally trained people to deal with troubled couples. The following point is not entirely serious. Such coupled therapy should, I think, exist on the international stage to advise countries who find themselves in unhealthy asymmetrical relationships with other countries. Certain pairings, I think, would need quite urgent therapy, if this was the case. For example, the United States and Israel would be a very interesting case. No matter who is in the White House, a small Middle Eastern country seems to be making the demands, setting the agenda, and it's the superpower that seems very anxious to accommodate. True authors like the late Amy Kaplan have argued that the US fascination with Israel is actually self-regarding. It sees an idealized version of itself in its imagined Israel. I mean, if there is such couple therapy for countries, I think Serbia and Russia could do with some time on the analyst couch. I think Vučić's "we cannot change ourselves on this issue" is not really, at this stage, putting Serbia's interests first. Serbia certainly can change, despite the constraints, and the constraints have to be taken seriously. Serbia, like Hungary and others, has been reliant on Russian fossil fuel. Yet again, there is more to Viktor Orban's unwillingness to help out with sanction than Russia and gas supplies, important as those are. There is rather more a set of shared values, which is very disappointing from a country which is already existing in the EU. The EU, would like to reiterate, is a community of democracy, a community of democracies. It remains one of its great strengths. What has been called now the democratic backslide has been led by the present regime in Hungary and given some support from some of the other Visegrad countries. Of these, Poland, I think, has mattered most. Poland, as I would see it, is taking its rightful place as one of the great countries of Europe. With its demographic weight, its high education standard and skilled workforce, it is increasingly a major player in Europe, more so since the regrettable decision of the UK to go its own way. Despite some disappointing populist trends, most especially about LGBTQ rights and some of the perceptions of migrants, values which are, of course, currently shared by the current regimes in Hungary and Russia, Poland has been very clear-headed about Putin's war. Poland has hosted over 1 million Ukrainian refugees, in fact, much more in absolute numbers, as many of the refugees have since returned, and has become a supplier of arms and other material. It's currently leaning on Germany to move forward with the liberation of tanks to the area. And this too is a lesson from the present crisis. Some countries have the historical experience and collective memory to identify real danger and make clear decisions based on that reading of history. Bulgaria actually offers a heartening story in this. When the invasion began 11 months ago, former Prime Minister Petkov and former Finance Minister Vasilev managed to send much-needed military equipment and diesel fuel to Ukraine. They did this rather covertly, knowing that there were pro-Moscow forces in Sofia who would have been against such a one-sided and partisan stance. Plus, there was the real fear of Moscow interrupting fuel supplies to Bulgaria if it found out that senior Bulgarian figures were aiding Ukraine. A minor history lesson. Bulgarians and Serbs have very similar historical experiences: admiration of Orthodox Russia, resentment of their Ottoman conquerors. Yet, for whatever reason, they have rarely been on the same side since they gained independence. They fought in 1885, again in 1913. They were on opposing sides in both world wars. Even as communists, there was distrust between the two countries. The only time they managed to fight on the one side was in the First Balkan War of 1912. A year later, they were fighting against each other. This is strange. Perhaps they also could do with some couple therapy. There was intense pressure from Moscow on Bulgaria, cyber attacks, and then, pretty much as feared, Gazprom chose Bulgaria as the first EU country where it would sever gas exports. But alternative supplies of gas, in this case from the United States, were arranged. Yes, there were favorable financial circumstances, which the United States very generously met. It nonetheless took political will and moral courage. Again, an inspiring story of people reacting and finding themselves on the right side of history, even at a cost. A much smaller scale story, but one that also inspires. With the attacks on the energy networks in Ukraine, quick solutions have been required. One came from a rather unlikely source, the quite small Bosnian town of Gorazde. During Bosnia's own war, the town was cut off and needed to find sources of electricity. People in Gorazde then created homemade generators, crude but effective ways of using the water of the river Drina to generate electricity. A local school teacher recalled the time, and I quote, "We improvised with many things to create the power stations. It wasn't a lot of material. We made it from workshops that we built. We looked for material in junkyards, broken cars. We removed parts, engines from machines, and we assembled these stations." Representatives at that town are now sending instructions to Ukraine on how to build generators in harsh wartime conditions. In this, they are being aided by the EU, which is its intermediary. To actually conclude already, the crisis in Ukraine has brought out good and unfortunately bad traits. On the negative side, we mentioned the opportunism of some players, a willingness to be deceived even. That is, to believe propaganda, while dismissing realities as themselves disinformation, even dismissing realities as propaganda. In the grey zone, it is to be hoped that Putin's corrupt democratura and its war will be a sobering reminder of the importance of democracy and the danger posed to it by populist regimes. Hopefully, this will lead to a renewed strengthening of democracy in Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Brendan, especially for providing also insights inside of the EU and not only from the Western Balkans. Our next speaker is Irfan Čengić, SD member of the Parliament of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina House of Peoples. And Irfan will focus on the energy crisis and the various effects it has had on the Western Balkans, and especially since some of the countries are highly dependent on Russian energy, which Brendan also already mentioned.
Thank you, Jelena. Do you hear me? Yes. Thank you for invitation to be today here and to speak about energy crisis on Western Balkan, but with special focus on Bosnia and Herzegovina, because I'm from Bosnia and I know the situation in that country the best. It's really a pleasure to be and speak about this crisis, but before this crisis on Western Balkan we had crisis with energy, and we call that a crisis energy transition, because we are not ready. Europe is going to greener, better future in energy sector, cleaner, sustainable, but on Balkan that is not quite situation. And before energy crisis, before war in Ukraine and COVID pandemic, to combat with climate change we need green energy, and that is not the case on the Western Balkan, especially in the Bosnia and Herzegovina. In Western Balkans it's really important because we relies heavily on the fossil fuels. We have a coal thermal plant in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia, and we compensate that with social cheap price of electricity in our country. And politicians, in my opinion, are not ready for transition because they don't think about future generation, they think about next mandate. And if you think about next mandate, you will give cheap electricity to your voters to vote again for you. We have energy security problems and economic development problems with transition because of big number of workers in the mine sectors, miners, and producing coal, all industry who are connected with coal, miners and everything. So we are highly dependent of coal, lack of investment in renewable. There is exception in Albania and North Macedonia where they invest a lot in the solar in the first place because they have a lot of sunny days. It's not like in Finland or Bosnia. And they're using that, but they still need import electricity in this crisis time, and this is cost a lot for budget of that countries. We have a lack of integration in regional and Europe market. I discussed yesterday about Finland and Sweden and Norway. You have joint market, you act together, and we even don't build hydro plants on river between countries. We can use Drina River to build 2 or 3 new hydro plants, but we cannot have agreement between Serbia and Bosnia and agreement inside Bosnia who will run that new hydro plant and etc. We have also a big number of workers in the industry connected with coal, what I mentioned, and for politicians who think about next mandate, not about next generation, they don't want to have fight with 10,000 mine workers in our mining industry. And they don't give them any better future because they know in next 10, 15 years that industry will be probably dead. But they are thinking, we have now 50, 60, 70 years old, that will be Irfan problems in his mandate in next 10 years. They don't want to solve that problems now. We have a lot of opportunities on Western Balkan also, not just problems in energy transition. One of opportunity that we have a lot of rivers. And we have really used our hydro potential, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia, on the river Drina and other rivers, and that will be the biggest challenges of new government who will be elected tomorrow in Bosnia and Herzegovina, how to build hydro plants on Drina and to be satisfied by Bosniak, Serbs, Croats and every other nation living in that country. But because people seeing that not like energetic project, they're seeing that like war about river. And that is problem on the Western Balkan. It's not all about economy or future. It's all about past, and that's what Brandon talking about in his presentation. We have a lot of also potential in wind and solar, especially in wind in Bosnia and solar Montenegro, North Macedonia and Albania. And we can reduce our using electricity, because we can have lower consumption, energy efficient buildings, because our buildings are not energy efficient and we are losing a lot of our electricity for these buildings. And also we signed the green agenda in Europe in Sofia process, but we forget green agenda when war in Ukraine started. And now I will start to talk about crisis after war in Ukraine, COVID and everything. We have in my country, we produce 70% our electricity from coal, and we export that electricity. To be honest, we don't have problem with electricity price in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because 30% of our electricity we export. So what government is doing? We produce 1 megawatt for 60 euros, and we give to household for 30 euros. So we lose when we give our private consumption in the Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they are happy because they have the cheapest electricity in the Europe. And what we are doing, we are taking the opportunities of crisis and selling our electricity to Europe for 500 euros or even more, especially of days. And that is short term really good for Bosnia, because you have cheap electricity for your people and selling really high prices, but in near future we will have problems because 70% of our electricity is from coal. And we have problems because our government wants to build new thermal plant from coal, and EU won't give you money for that, and we take money from Chinese. And when you take money from Chinese, you're doing that by their rules. And they promised in contract General Electric's motors, and now they will not give us General Electric's motors, they will give us Chinese version of that motors. And that is problem, because we have a loan 1.5 billions. We cannot build a new thermal plant. We will not have electricity, which we hoping for next 20 years from new thermal plant. And we have loan with Chinese, and we don't have General Electric's motors. So we started to repair our old 2 blocks, but that 2 blocks will be shut down in next 10 years. And what will be happen with Bosnia in my maybe mandate when I should be in the government? I will not have 70% of electricity. I will not export electricity, and we will must import electricity and have big prices of electricity for our people in Bosnia. But nobody today talking about that. Situation is worse in Serbia, similar but worse, because they don't have enough electricity to export. They are using thermal plant and coal and everything. Even they import coal from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we now have a problem in Bosnia because our private miners and company don't want to sell coal in Bosnia. They sell coal to the Serbia because they are have bigger price. They're paying bigger price for that coal. And I think that about 1 billion euros it's costing in importing of that coal and importing of electricity in Serbia, to paying low price of electricity price in Serbia, also because Vučić and his government also don't want to have problem with people. They will subsidize that from state budget, but at the end state budget is people money also. We have big problems with Chinese influence in energy sector, because the biggest investment now is running by Chinese. I talk about thermal plant. We have telecommunication new network. It's all about Huawei. And the third one is absurd, that EU give us money, grants and loans for the highway, and Chinese company building that highway. And that is a really big problem, because there is more and more presence of Chinese in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the biggest problems in the crisis are not the same problem like in Europe, because in first we have cheap price electricity for our economy and people in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because government are not responsible. They are giving that cheap price and taking money from the budget in every country which import electricity, and Bosnia taking advantage of war in Ukraine and high prices of electricity and export 30% of our electricity to Europe and use that money to substitute our electricity price. We will have more problems in future because of green agenda. We will not implement what we signed in our agreement. And similar situation is Serbia and Kosovo, especially where they have reduction of electricity because of they don't have enough electricity in that country. We are all together in these problems, and this is the key message, because we are not some isolated Iceland in Europe. We are together in these all problems. We are not member of EU, but we are a country in the Europe, all Western Balkan, and in crisis we see that we must act together in this crisis. And one of the threats for our energy system is attacks of our infrastructure. To be honest, Russia is present on Western Balkan. Professor Brandon speak about that, but we had big problems, especially in the Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have one part of country in Bosnia which go to the Moscow in the middle of the crisis, give Putin order and prizes in the middle of the crisis. And believe me, there is a lot of potential people in both of these countries. And Montenegro has similar problem like Bosnia. They have half of their political forces who work for Putin and Russia, and Serbia is trying to play on both sides, Europe and Russia, and that will not be easy next period, but they can attack our infrastructure. We don't have strong security on our energy infrastructure, pipelines and everything, and they have enough people in Bosnia, infiltrated in Bosnia, Montenegro and Serbia especially, to do something like this. I didn't speak about gas. We are highly dependent about Russian gas. We have building the new pipeline from Sarajevo to Croatia to have LNG terminal in Adriatic Sea, but that is blocked in the House of People of Parliament, that agreement, because of Russian influence. They have forces who want to block that in Parliament. We adopted that bill in the House of Representatives last year, but it's 1 year in the House of Peoples. It was never on the agenda of our session because of that influence, because they don't want to have Sarajevo connection to the Adriatic Sea, because then you can bring the gas from other countries. The price of gas is huge in Bosnia. We have a lot of problems in our capital city because we are using gas for a heating system, and the prices are going up, and people, because of big inflation of 16% average inflation in Bosnia last year, they cannot pay gas, and then they are using what they can use, wood, everything, and then we have economy problem and an environmental problem. I will stop here because I see the foreign minister is here, and he will probably have another meeting after this, and Jelena will be angry on me.
Thank you, Irfan. We will continue the discussion later. And then I would like to warmly welcome our Minister for Foreign Affairs, Pekka Haavisto, who has, among other things, already worked in the Balkans in the 90s on the behalf of UNEP, investigating the environmental effects of the wars. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and I can see that you are already deep on the Balkan topics here. And first I want to thank the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation for organizing this timely event. And of course the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine continues to be in the heart of Europe, and at the same time great power tensions are growing globally. At such a time the importance of Western Balkans cannot be overstated. Many of our most well-known political leaders have played a significant role in the region. I'm thinking about Matti Ahtisaari, I'm thinking about Elisabeth Rehn, Harri Holkeri, Olli Rehn, and so forth. Western Balkans has been a very important point for us Finns as well. And as mentioned, I also started my, so to say, international career when leading the United Nations investigation on environmental damage after the Kosovo war, and then went deep into the depleted uranium topic as well, which was very exciting, I have to say. These ties have helped us to understand better the region and its importance to the European Union. We are committed to the peace and stability of the Western Balkans. Finland is one of the most active supporters of EU enlargement. We worked hard, for example, to advance the opening of negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia during our EU presidency in 2019. I was relieved when we were finally able to start the membership negotiations with both last summer. We can all admit that the frustration with the slowness of our partners' paths toward EU membership is understandable. When the criteria are met, there should be no excuses to delay the process. The EU also must deliver. For Finland, it's clear that the criteria should be the same for all applicant countries. Merits should dictate the pace of the negotiations. Ukraine and Moldova became candidate countries in record time. Georgia will follow as soon as the agreed steps have been taken. Bosnia and Herzegovina achieved candidate status in December, and we will do our best to help Ukraine along on their EU perspective. Today is of course not business as usual situation. In the current European security landscape, enlargement is a key geopolitical tool for the European Union. Just some weeks ago, we finally reached agreement in the EU on granting visa freedom to Kosovo. Kosovars took another historic step on the 15th of December as they submitted their application for the membership of the European Union. We welcome their application and all the other steps forward our partners are taking, as they show that the Union is still valued highly for the prosperity, common values and shared political strength it brings to each of its members. Dear friends, we are very grateful to our allies in the Western Balkans who quickly gave their full support to our NATO membership. We look forward to building an even stronger cooperation with our Western Balkan partners in NATO. We commend Albania on their work in the UN Security Council. We will also work closely with North Macedonia in their chairmanship of the OSCE. And actually this OSCE part is interesting because we will celebrate the 2025, the 50th year of the Helsinki Final Act, and we should build probably some kind of new security architecture for Europe. As you know, North Macedonia is leading the OSCE 2023, then we don't know who is in 2024, and then Finland 2025. So there is an empty space blocked by Russia actually at the moment, and it might be that North Macedonia has to continue 2 years, and we of course are committed to help them during this part. We thank those partners, Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia and Kosovo, who have fully aligned themselves with the EU common foreign and security policy, including sanctions against Russia. This is crucially important as we have to show Russia the price of their aggression and unlawful attack on Ukraine. Serbia has not aligned with EU sanctions on Russia, and we call on them to do so. Serbia stands to gain much more through a committed integration into the European Union, where we want to welcome them as our full partners. At the moment, Serbia risks to be left behind and without the economic and social benefits EU membership brings. I'm deeply concerned about the recent tensions in northern Kosovo. I would like to see Kosovo and Serbia move forward in the normalization of their relations as soon as possible. Finland is a strong supporter of the EU-facilitated dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. We want to see both Kosovo and Serbia prosperous and safe in the future as part of the European Union. Finland has a long history of commitment to peace and stability in Kosovo. We have just reinforced our participation in the NATO-led KFOR. For Finland, rule of law is the cornerstone of a stable and well-functioning democratic society. In times of crisis, rule of law is tested and even challenged. It's worrying that, as stated in the latest enlargement package of the European Commission, we have seen little progress in the core areas of rule of law and the fundamentals in several enlargement countries. The European Union stands for human rights, democracy and the rule of law. These values apply to both candidate countries as well as EU member states. I want to mention the recent very positive steps that the region took towards common regional market. The new agreements reached in December within the framework of the Berlin process will substantially facilitate traveling within Western Balkans and employment across borders. As of October 2023, data roaming prices between Western Balkans and EU will be reduced significantly. Regional cooperation will unlock the economic potential of the region and will also bring it closer to eventual integration to the single market. Building a better future for our youth should also be our focus. Brain drain is a serious problem in the whole of Western Balkans, and we have just recently seen signs of this here in Finland. The trend needs to be changed. Actually, I remember when I was a couple of years ago interrailing again after many, many years in the Western Balkans as well, and met many young people there and discussed about this brain drain out from the Western Balkan countries, and even met actually some people, young people in Belgrade, who were very skeptical towards European Union because they were thinking that European Union is just taking the brains out from the country and offering jobs for young people in other countries, but not in their own country. And I think we have a lot to do on this issue as well in the Western Balkans. Finally, the EU does not have any hidden agendas. We must communicate openly what are the benefits and responsibilities of EU membership. However, EU cannot reach the citizens of Western Balkan countries without the help of the governments and civil society in the region. The EU and the Western Balkans are already strongly interlinked. The citizens of the 6 Western Balkan countries benefit in many ways from the same advantages as EU citizens. For example, out of the 25 key EU programs, such as Erasmus Plus and Horizon Europe, 20 are already open to our Western Balkan partners, and they are all actively participating. However, there is a chasm in development between the region's EU members and the non-members. This will only keep widening if we lose focus in the enlargement process. In many Western Balkan countries, popular support towards EU membership remains strong, but this should not be taken for granted. And at the same time, we must work against malign influences and narratives distorting the image of a unified Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Pekka, for your insights. Very important to note that we are all in this together. Now I would kindly ask all of our panelists to join me here on stage so we can start. Joo, tuolta takaa. We'll just wait. Joo. So just a reminder, we have here Ledion Shahini from Cemal Stafa Foundation Albania, Irfan Čengić, member of the parliament from Bosnia, Brendan Humphreys from Aleksanteri-instituutti, and then Kimmo Lähdevirta, who is coming, an ambassador to Serbia, North Macedonia, and Montenegro. Did I get the countries right? Good. Okay, I will first start with my question, and then we can continue with yours if you have some. I'm going a couple of steps back with my first question, and this is something that came up in all of your speeches. And as you mentioned, there is now a lot of foreign influence in the Western Balkans coming from different stakeholders from in different spheres. And it seems that it has increased during these crises. So my question is, why is the Western Balkans such a fertile ground for this foreign influence? And with this, I mean the negative influence, the one that tends to be undemocratic. And has it actually increased, or are we just now starting to pay attention to it?
This question for all of us?
We can start with Ledion, maybe.
Okay.
You're the first one.
Okay, we'll follow the rule. Okay. So, as I mentioned, even during this crisis period, the Western Balkan countries has shown that they were not too much prepared regarding the foreign influences, and especially now that we are during this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, we see that there are many increase of the influences in the region, and of course there are even some conflicts in the regions, like the last one between Serbia and Kosovo in the Mitrovica region. Which, in fact, if we see the reason of that conflict, it's very simple and not too much important, but it creates a conflict between two countries. At the same time, I'm going again to 2022, even to Albania, and if I'm not wrong, it happens even in Bosnia. There were some cybernetic attacks in the countries. Albania faced 3 cybernetic crises in 2022. Because in May of 2022, Albania agreed to have all government services online, and immediately, like 2 months later, we have the first attack. The whole e-government system has been attacked. We had like 2-3 days problems. After that, we had another one with the borders database, and after that, even another one with the bank systems. So just the data of the citizens. But three main attacks bring to us that the security systems were not well prepared, or the allies with whom we operate maybe were not the right one, because there were even some countries accused about this situation. So saying that, even that some of the countries of the Western Balkans are in NATO and they have to fulfill some criteria. When it comes in general, the crisis starting from pandemic situation and later on shows that the countries have a lot to do in this regard. So.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up question on this, but let's go around first if you have.
Okay, I think that it's not foreign influence on the Western Balkan started now. It's more noticed,
Yeah,
and it's more interesting for European country. And why we are so good for foreign interest is one of the reason is a corrupted politician, because for Chinese, Russians, and every other country which is not Western, don't have Western values, it's much easier to work with politicians who are corrupted. EU will never have for their project corruption and similar things, but Chinese for their projects, for their interests, for Huawei, they don't need a network in country which have 2 or 3 million people. We are not economically important for them, but for them it's important to have database in the one country from Europe. And that is what we don't understand. The another problem is with our people, because they are tired of domestic politicians who are not doing anything the last 25 years significant to be part of European Union, and they are, like foreign minister says, they have conspiracy theories that EU don't want us, that EU taking a brain drain and similar thing. And when you have a population who are disappointed in the domestic politician and don't have a big trust like 20 years ago in European and Western values, that is good for Russian or Chinese or every other Iranian influence or similar like thing. We had last month that our foreign minister in whole this crisis in Iran, where you have a lot of problem with women's rights and everything, have a meeting in Sarajevo with Islamic Republic of Iran foreign ministers. We had Milorad Dodik, who is going to the Moscow and giving the order to the Putin. And both of that political parties, right-wing Bosniaks, Muslims party, or right-wing Serbs, Dodik party, they won on the election. They won a big number of votes. And in the middle of that crisis, they had meetings with Iran and Russia. And our social democratic forces will form government, but that is big coalition, and we will need still Milorad Dodik in that coalition from Republika Srpska. So because of that, two main factors we are so good for foreign influence on our countries.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that maybe it hasn't that much increased, but we are starting to kind of notice it and pay attention because of everything that's happening in Europe, because it has come it's a bigger threat now. Yeah. Thank you, Irfan. Kimmo.
Yeah, thanks very much. I have been ambassador in Belgrade covering Serbia, Montenegro and North Macedonia now almost 4 years. So I'm here in the role of an outside observer, and the minister already gave the official view, so what I'm saying is just my personal thinking. But regarding disinformation and misinformation and outside influence, it's really difficult to say whether it's increased or whether it's just more visible, that people are now paying more attention to it. But it definitely is a problem, and I think some of the factors that are contributing to Western Balkans being such a fertile ground for it are first of all, the divisions in the societies. It's easy to foment divisions, especially as then perhaps the media literacy of the people is not very good. There are always politicians who want to exploit issues to their own benefits. Also, I think the role of media is crucial, and I would say that there are too few independent quality medias in the Balkans, and I think that's a serious issue that should be addressed somehow. There are plenty of medias, plenty of commercial medias, but their contents is not necessarily very good, and it can be really biased in some cases. So I think perhaps that sort of issues are something that are contributing for the outside influence gained success, and I think really what is problematic also from the EU's point of view is that governments have been, if not reluctant, but anyway they have not put much effort to giving let's say balanced view about issues from different directions, what the EU is doing, what other countries are doing. I think this is something also that the governments should have a look at in the region.
Thank you. That was actually my follow-up question, that how should the Western Balkan governments themselves kind of tackle this problem? Because from my kind of point of view, I would say that one of the problems is that you or the Western Balkan countries kind of lack the institutional mechanisms first to recognize the foreign influence, and when we lack the mechanisms, we can't kind of in a way tackle the issue because we don't acknowledge it. So I would also like to hear, do you agree with this? And then it relates to kind of different spheres, that we have the disinformation, we have the media, but first we need to kind of recognize it in every level of society. But if Brendan wants to go first.
I don't know if I can add much more to what's already been said, but I mean, the first word comes to mind that I used earlier is opportunism. Yeah. Unfortunately, the negative outside influences are going to very quickly get into what are, in several cases, post-conflict zones. Yeah. Destroyed civil society, deeply divided polities, and so on. Obviously, countries emerging from harsh circumstances like that will need outside sponsors, whether that's political, economic, rhetorical, or whatever else. But just to flip it on the other side, I mean, there have been very positive outside influences as well. Yeah. Minister Haavisto rightly pointed out the disproportionate good influence that Finland has had in the Western Balkans in terms of peacekeeping, building civil society, strengthening democracy, from the work you're doing yourself. So I would leave it at that.
Yeah, and that was also an important point, that I think we usually discuss about the problems in the region, but we have to start discussing also the opportunities a lot more, also for example, in the Finnish media and yeah. But do you have a comment on the kind of institutional mechanisms or the lack of them, or?
When you are a small country, you need influence. Yeah. So it's just question, it's good influence or bad influence. Yeah. We need more influence from the United States in Bosnia, and we have more influence from European Union. But European Union must be aware when they give us some money for loans, credit, they must have measures and mechanism to prevent that Chinese company will build that. Because when people see that Chinese company is there, Chinese company building the highway, they don't know that we took loan from EBRD or European grants, EU funds. And that is problem of EU delegation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because they don't put EU flag on everything. And Russia, China, or some Islamic country don't do anything, don't give money, but they put stamps. Like Brandon said, we all think that Serbs and Russians are good countries and everything, but when you see the record, it's not just that Russia helping a lot of Serbia. Serbia have bigger economy and everything with European Union than Russia. The same problem is in Bosnia. So we need influence, but we need bigger influence of Western values and to fight with negative influence. But now you have politicians who see that they can use that negative politician for the bribery, for corruption, for winning election. Because Dodik will not visit Moscow in election period if he don't know that his people want that. And he is going in the election time to visit Moscow and Putin for 15 minutes, and he win election because of that.
Yeah.
And opposition in the Republika Srpska also wanted to be with Putin, but he don't want to be with them, and they are not changed. So we need influence, and we must prevent our domestic politicians who are corrupted to use negative influence and have a bigger influence from especially United States. Because people in Bosnia, I don't know about every other country in Western Balkan, think that only United States can keep the peace and bring the peace in the Bosnia and Herzegovina because they believe in their forces and military or etc. And because of that, the NATO is such a big topic in Bosnia in the last 1 year, because Bosniaks and Croats want to be part of NATO. We know that we have small military. We know that we have small military budget. We will not give anything more to NATO, but we want to be secure that we will have peace and to have a peaceful country and to take about economy. And when nobody wishes to be part of of NATO to attack somebody or something like that. We just need a peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can add something. The Western Balkan countries, but specifically the Mediterranean one, have even this kind of feeling that they want things as shortly in period as possible. So you are with them or you are not with them. Reflection is a bit strong in this case. I'll start in 2019 when Albania has 2 earthquakes, one in September and one in November. And especially the one in November, which has too many damages. And most of the help comes from non-EU countries, I mean from money support. And in the population was created a feeling that EU don't want us, in the general perception. Even that Albania has the highest pro-EU ratio regarding the perception of the citizens. In that moment, it was a kind of feeling like that, which has been forced even more during the pandemic, because in the beginning of the pandemic, again, the first support comes from non-EU countries. And saying that, again, the feeling has been increased even more regarding the perception of EU's to the Western Balkan countries. And EU in this regard has to work more, because now what has been seen is the vice versa. So immediately after the negotiation process started with Albania and Macedonia, people start to believe that they are not left behind. So after that, we start, even that the new methodology had a lot of discussion in Albania too, because it has been perception from the citizens how it has been transmitted to them, because it's not that general public has too much knowledge about the methodology, but again, how it has been transmitted to them from this secondary media was that the EU created another methodology just to postpone the process for Albania, North Macedonia, and the Western Balkan countries, which stratify all the chapters in 6 groups, and they have to be opened strata by strata, and then to start fulfilling the chapter's requirement. But from the other side, directly after that, Albania and North Macedonia start to have meetings regarding each of the strata, and within the 2023, all the strata meetings will be finished, and after that will start the process of fulfillment of the requirements, in which some of the chapters are easily to be fulfilled. And this one has a positive impact to the citizens, because now people are thinking that something positive is coming. We are fighting regarding the crime, the corruption, even that perception, again, it's high, but positive impact is being given. So to conclude, if we can manage to increase more the cooperation in the Western Balkan countries with each other, not only just regarding the economy aspects, but even to the awareness, because in many cases the perception in these countries has to be fulfilled with more realistic information. There are so many European projects happening right now, and opening the negotiations process brings us a lot of more money regarding the projects and support from the EU. And this kind of messages has to be given as much as possible to the people of the Western Balkan countries.
Thank you, Leon, and actually that kind of tackles my next question, that if we move towards a more positive direction, a lot has happened this year, as we have been discussing. North Macedonia and Albania finally started the negotiations, and the Western Balkans EU summit was for the first time held in the region in Tirana now in December, and then Bosnia was granted the candidate status, and Kosovo the visa liberation. So and we all know that the fact that it has taken so long for the EU to kind of to move forward in these steps has kind of decreased the support for the EU in the region. But but you also kind of already answered this. But have these steps forward? How have they been perceived in the region? And can we see that they have already or will in the future increase and regain the credibility of the EU?
I will first now.
Yeah, you can start first. Because,
Our EU's candidacy status is seen in the general public like gift, because the people know that politicians didn't deserve that. We have 14 priorities and conditions to be a candidate for EU status, and they know that we didn't fulfill none of them, or maybe one.
Yeah.
But they are also angry on the EU Commission and European Union, because they know that you can give that gift 5 years ago, because for EU candidacy status is just political matter.
Yep.
It's political topic. It's not about any negotiation or nothing. And I think that EU lose 5 years for nothing, because if we get EU candidacy status 5 years ago, maybe now we will, in 2003, we should open the negotiation and etc. and etc. So EU must be more honest and open. Why we need a condition for candidacy status only. We know that we need a condition for open negotiation. We need open and close the chapters and everything. That is okay, but just for some political message like candidacy status, you give us now and we didn't do anything. This is also a wrong message for the people, because they know their politician, their government didn't do anything and they get EU candidacy status. Why you didn't give us candidacy status 5 years ago or something like that? But that is a really good message for the new government in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we expect that we will now fulfill 3, 4, 5 conditions, and to show for European Union that we are ready in the next 4 years to open negotiation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think the decision to open negotiations finally with Albania and North Macedonia was a necessary step, but not a sufficient step yet. More needs to follow. Of course, North Macedonia needs to be able to change its constitution, which in the present circumstances is not an easy task.
No, and also that has been kind of one of the issues, and it hasn't been taken well in North Macedonia.
Indeed, but I really hope that the political parties in North Macedonia could come together in this issue, because it's such an important thing for the country's future. Another example that I would perhaps take is Montenegro, which unfortunately lost a year in the negotiations process last year. I mean, because they were not able to follow the let's say interim benchmarks that were set to them that they should have taken care of last year. I hope that this year would be better, because if Montenegro could finally start to progress on the way towards the EU, I think that would also give a positive signal to the region and for the other countries that this is for the real.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you have something?
Just a couple of very, very general comments. I'm bringing it back a few decades, as is my profession. But I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that the EU began, long before it was the EU. I think that first of all, the European Coal and Steel Community, it was from its birth a conflict resolution body.
Yeah.
It did very difficult politics in the rubble of the end of the Second World War. And again, I bring the Northern Ireland perspective. The late John Hume, the Nobel Prize winner, early on spoke about how EU membership, even before Ireland was a member, or even before Britain was a member, could be a healing process in Northern Ireland's conflict. And I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that the EU has had that role. That sounds maybe a little bit idealistic, but nonetheless, there should be
a reminder that
perhaps this, should be stressed. And in dealing with the several post-conflict zones that we have in the Western Balkans, I think that's a role that the EU could be more vigorous on.
Yeah.
And I think it would maybe gain more traction than from skeptical, tired local populations if it could highlight the fact that the EU has, over its different incarnations over the decades, has been in fact a peace-building body as well as a political and economic union.
Yeah. And that also reminds me of of the fact that as you all mentioned, that we need to keep in mind the public as well, in addition to the political aspect of the enlargement, and the fact that we need the public in the Western Balkans, regular citizens, to remain convinced that the EU will provide answers and solutions to their problems. So do you have an idea? This relates to more maybe to Legion and the think tanks in the region, but what could the EU be doing in terms of funding projects that are directly related to the enlargement and promoting it? Or what could regional think tanks or civil society do more in order to promote it? Because I think one of the issues is that the EU lacks visibility. That's an issue. So how can we increase the visibility?
Okay.
It's a tricky question.
Yeah, but I'll start mostly with the cooperation between countries, because I think that this is the crucial topic that has to be in the next step. Because till now, a lot has been focused regarding even the EU countries, the capacity building skills within the countries. So there have been so many bilateral projects, even between non-EU with EU countries, but not too much as a whole region. So if you see projects, let's take different projects in general, you see that there are just a few that cover the whole Western Balkan 6 countries. I have experience, in fact, because I've worked even as a head of project unit in the University of Tirana in Albania, and really there were so few projects covering the whole regions. And all the times the cooperation was between non-EU with EU countries, and always taking the examples of EU countries, which is good in one way, but when it comes to creating a good network between countries, which can improve the awareness as a region now, it's missing. What I'm saying to increase the awareness, because all times, even that a lot has been done regarding the cooperation between our countries. We had in the last years a visit of Albanian Prime Minister to Serbia, and the visit of Prime Minister of Serbia to Albania, which hasn't happened, I don't know for how many years, I can't remember right now, which is a good message regarding the cooperation from the political level, but it has to go even in the citizens. And if you see, even in the political aspects, except Berlin process or Open Balkan, the last one, which has even an economic influence with some concrete results, there are a few regarding the awareness of citizens, even in the history, even in cooperation of cultures. There are missing these kind of things. And here, I think that civil society in general can focus a lot. And regarding to that, all the partners can push more this kind of initiatives, not just having these bilateral cooperations, but covering the whole regions. So I think this is what has to be pushed a lot. And another thing is related even with the agenda in general, because for the moment the whole focus, it's an emergent situation, but the whole focus is given in the energy. So we have, even in the Berlin process, we had 1 billion euro just for the energy sector. And some other topics that has been more in focus before, now they have been pushed for later. But if we take the whole region after 5 years, 10 years, this will bring us again only in economic cooperation. Even that is the most important one, let's say, in all overview. But when it comes to the more deep cooperation between citizens, much more has to be done regarding the awareness of the civil society and the citizens in general.
Yeah, thank you. And I would also add that we, in my opinion, we would need more initiatives kind of regarding the joint cooperation that come from the region itself. Because, well, we have the Open Balkans initiative, but it has been controversial, and not all of the Western Balkan countries have joined it. But maybe you can continue to have.
About what?
About
Western Balkans or
about the
Open
how
Balkan?
can we promote the EU enlargement and through project and visibility, and how would you kind of...
We need a bigger visibility.
Yeah.
I answered that already on my previous question, because people don't understand process.
Yeah.
To be honest, politicians don't understand process. If my colleagues in parliament, if they get exam of knowledge of EU institution, name of the EU institution, and the process, half of them don't understand that. And how do you expect that people know what is EU? So, like my colleagues said, we must speak people with simple language and explain on simple way what is benefit of European Union, and to be honest with them. My colleague already said that on Balkan people want everything now, and I have 30 years old, and when I speak about European Union, I always said to my voters, don't expect in 10 or 15 years that we will become member. Because if Croatia, who have one parliament, one majority nation, need 10 years for negotiation and accession, don't expect that country with 14 entity, cantonal and state parliament and 14 government, 14 prime minister can do faster than Croatia. And we must be honest with them. And when you start to speak honestly with them, and to be honest that we cannot fix that in 2 mandates, we need maybe 3 or 4 mandates of government, and maybe you will lose 2 elections and come back again like Croatia, because Croatia started with SD government, Ivica Račan, and finished with Zoran Milanović government. And between was HDZ government, EPP. So we must be honest and simple with voters and explain what is EU process.
Yeah.
And perhaps to add that certainly visibility is needed here. And I think now with the candidate status of Ukraine and others, I think the enlargement process is now again on the radar of top leaders in Europe, and also more in the media. And I think that's very good, because unfortunately for the last 10 years or so it's been hibernating in a fairly bureaucratic exercise. And somehow we need to raise the level of awareness about the issues involved. And I think this is something that gives hope now, but we just need to make sure that the discussions within the EU and in the applicant countries follow suit, that there is actually something happening on both fronts, in the EU and in the applicant countries.
Yeah, so that kind of, in a way, both have to deliver. Yes. Do you have something to add, Brendan? Okay.
Perfectly. It's been wonderfully covered by.
Yeah. Now I think, because we are starting to.
You have 10 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, Irfan. Very kind of you. So, do we have questions from the audience to our panelists? Yes, Kalle.
Thank you very much. My name is Kalle Kankaanpää. I'm ambassador to Bosnia-Herzegovina. I'm based in Zagreb. One thing in the report and also in this discussion that I would like to draw the attention on is the role of the civil society.
Yes.
And it was quite positively mentioned in the report in the first presentation, but however we are talking about civil society organizations that are financed from abroad, by EU countries, other Western countries, and these organizations are highly dependent on that foreign support. But what we are unfortunately, as I see it, lacking is grassroots activity that would be capable of building its own activities independently. If we compare the 6 Western Balkan countries with Nordic countries, for instance, in our region here, we have a big number of all kinds of NGOs and think tanks and civil society organizations which are capable of talking about EU enlargement or whatever topic that we choose. But when we are talking about Western Balkan countries, there is still, for understandable reasons, the problem that the civil society in general is pretty weak. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why we cannot count on their support as much as we would love to. Because I see that this is a very important factor in the society, but it needs maybe a bit more time to become more strong.
Yeah, it is. And maybe you can comment regarding Albania and Bosnia.
Yeah, that one it's true, because what's happening in Western Balkan in general, but I can speak more specifically even for Albania. It's a big increase of number of NGOs which have short period financing from EU, but there are even a lot that are financed even from by government. Yeah, there are some agencies in the country that are supporting NGOs, which in this case, what very specific things is that the projects are very short, honestly speaking, like 6 months to 1 year, and the influence, it cannot be there, so if it's a very short one, and it's not continuously. So they just took one funds, they do something, and they stop there. And this brings us to this situation that the NGOs are not very well prepared. And another thing that is happening too, it's the fact that the NGOs or civil society is trying to cover all topics. It's not well defined, the field or the topics that they cover. And again, this one is a problem. But one thing that is happening, a positive one now, because these are, let's say, the process of development even in the sector of NGOs, so it's a period that will have a boom of number of NGOs. But the other thing that is happening, positive one, is the number of NGOs that are capable to take EU projects. Because 2-3 years before in Albania, for NGOs, it was something very, very far away to work, to write projects in the EU, I mean, in general. Nowadays, it become normal. So this one brings us to a situation that in the near future, a group of NGOs will be capable even to be much more focused in the EU integration process.
Do you have something to add regarding Bosnia?
It was pretty quite good comment.
Yeah. Someone else? And I would also, I think we have seen that regarding, for example, NGOs that relate to environment, I think they have been increasing
now
a
they
lot.
are giving more money for the topic.
Yeah.
20 years ago, there is none NGO about environment in the Balkan.
Yeah.
And now when that topic is on EU agenda, UN agenda, then is on topic of civic society.
Yeah.
And that is problem of budgeting and projects.
Yeah.
It's really a few NGOs who really, like Ambassador said, grassroots, really because of topic, not because of project or money. We have a lot of professional NGOs where people building their career in NGO, have some topic, and 1 or 2 years to be in NGO, and after that they go to politics or economy or university with that reference. And that is problem of civic society. That is a really small number of real grassroots civic society about some topic.
Yeah.
10 years ago, there's zero green agenda NGOs in Bosnia, and now you have 10 or 15, and they are on every topic, energy sector, everything, because now they have grants and money for that.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, or maybe 2 if we are quick.
3.
Okay. Quick ones, yes?
You must be quick, Jelena.
Yeah. Stop it.
Thank you. I'm pretty clumsy with this, but thank you. This has been really, really great. I'm Daniela from Serbian Embassy. So it was really good actually to hear different perspectives. And my question is, since we heard about public and the EU should be more visible in the public of the Western Balkans, my question is, what can be done to make EU enlargement, like importance of the EU enlargement, more visible to the publics of the countries of the EU? Actually, I've been here for more than 3 years. I've never ever read anything positive in the newspapers, in Finnish newspapers, about any of the countries of the Western Balkans. If there is a political silence and there is no any acute political crisis, then the titles say, oh, there is a heavily polluted river that needs to be cleaned, and etc., etc. So we can't expect EU public to be very open to our countries and our publics joining them in the EU if they can never hear anything positive. So, and it's not that there are no positive things going on. So, do you have any ideas, proposals, anything that can be done actually to help out in this other field, let's say, because we do know that in the Western Balkans there is a lot of job that needs to be done, but there is something that has to be done in EU countries too. Thank you.
So this question,
maybe I start anyway.
Yep.
And well, this is a good question, and I think the poll that was also mentioned in the research paper, showing that support for EU enlargement is perhaps lowest in Finland, is interesting. I don't dispute that poll result in any way, but on the other hand, it has also very low significance among the opinions of people. They are not thinking about EU enlargement. They are thinking about other things here. And this is really here in Finland, especially part of foreign and security policy, of which there is a very large consensus. And we have had a very long, consistent policy regarding enlargement, as the minister said, very much in support of enlargement process. And we are always ready to look into, let's say, practical ways to do cooperation with the countries of the region, and also to increase knowledge about the issues. But I think the problem is that it's very difficult for government of Finland to influence, for example, what the medias are writing or showing about the region.
Yeah.
They have their own interests, and usually, unfortunately, it's only the negative news that are news. Nothing else is. So if there are any ways to, for example, invite Finnish or other journalists to the region, I think that's something that the governments of the region should look into, what the possibilities really are to invite people there. Our embassy, for example, has hosted also groups of journalists who have come to the region on private trips organized by some others. And I think those are valuable things to increase knowledge about the region. Because really, I think Western Balkans is a region that people in Finland don't know much about, unfortunately.
Not at all.
And if they know, the image is mostly negative, unfortunately, because of history.
Yeah.
So this is a hurdle to cross. But on the other hand, like I said, this is really a government issue. And the significance of the issue lies with the government policy, not really what the Finnish public perception might be about these issues. So I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the polls or poll results, but really on what the government says about this issue, because it's I think largely shared also in the parliament that Finland is very much in favor of enlargement process.
Yeah, that's true. And I can also add that one of the solutions might be, for example, Kalevi Sorsa Foundation is now, and Irfan is also involved in this kind of Friends of Western Balkans network, which is a group of SD parliamentarians and think tanks from the Western Balkans region and EU. So we meet regularly and we think of ways how we can advocate the EU enlargement in our respective countries. So that's something kind of very concrete, what we can and what we hope to do. And that's something, of course, an issue of our foundation and the democracy support we have been doing to raise kind of different voices from the region in the Finnish debate. So I think you are very kind of absolutely right on this, that we need the EU member countries as well on board. Were there, I think we can still, well, we can take one question and then we'll have two quick ones. Elli, yes, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Eli Luukkainen, and my question is probably for Kimmo and maybe for Brendan if you want to comment. President Vučić is talking about Kosovo a lot, also in terms of like EU enlargement for and the EU path for Serbia. To put it quick, do you think, because there are also other hurdles in the way of Serbia's path towards the EU other than Kosovo, but Kosovo is getting a lot of attention in that matter. Do you think Vučić's regime and government actually want to be a part of EU or not?
Well, that's anyway what they say. It's very difficult to say what people think, but anyway, the official policy really is that Serbia is in the accession process and wants to become a member. And then that not, of course, entails also that officially at least Serbia wants to fulfill all the criteria for membership, being it rule of law, democracy, media, issues with Kosovo or normalization of the relations between Serbia and Kosovo. So all those are in the agenda and being talked about. So this is what we have to take as the starting point. But then of course there are many issues which are affecting things, and it like I said, it's really difficult to go inside the head of politicians what they think deep down. But I hope really that this is still the policy that Serbia wants to pursue.
I mean, I would just add that, I mean, if you look at the various criteria Serbia has to fulfill, it has fulfilled many of them. So its position is rather strong. Of course, the open issue, the elephant in the room, is Kosovo. I wonder if there's not the hope that it will sort of somehow or other resolve itself or weaken or not be as much of a sticking point, and that the closer the process gets, proportionately maybe people will see the benefits and then maybe downgrade the issue of Kosovo itself. From my own experience of Serbia, going back many years, I have found that it's obviously a very emotive issue for Serbs, but I have found many individual Serbs don't care that much about Kosovo. that they're going to let it go. We had a debate years ago in oppia. Somebody from Belgrade spoke very eloquently about this, and I nonetheless asked him, many other places have signed off. They realize that it's gone. Kareli is not coming back. Algeria is not going back to France. There's numerous other analogies. None of them quite fit. But when I said, when is there going to be a senior politician or any politician in Belgrade who's willing to admit Kosovo's gone and not coming back? His response was, you might as well ask an Israeli, when would they give up Jerusalem? That rhetorical response, whereas I found many individual Serbs, we're better off without it. Hopefully, maybe the lethargy of the conflict will be increased and proportionately the benefits will seem to be stronger. But there is a very difficult equation to be balanced there. I don't say that's going to be easy politics by any means.
Thank you. And now the last question. We are running a bit late, but I hope that's
Thank
okay.
you. I'm Duina Karjalainen from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. I would have a question concerning cooperation and capacity building in the field of defense and security, and whether in the Western Balkans there are increasing hopes and expectations towards European Union in this field, for European Union to do more cooperation or capacity building in security and defense, since EU is now doing it also with Ukraine, or do these aspirations only deal with NATO?
I can answer on that. I am on the security committee in the parliament. I am the youngest there. But to be honest, our government and our public, it's more expecting that NATO than EU. We don't know a lot about EU security. It's not visible for us, EU security system and everything, and we expect everything from NATO and the United States. I will be completely honest here. I think that we are already NATO. NATO have, by our constitution and the resolution of UN, mandate to come in Bosnia whenever they want. We have our armed forces are by NATO standards. All our weapons and everything we use is by approved by NATO and alliance and everything. We, like country where we have 3 members of presidency, we can be only problem for decision making in NATO process. You have now Finland and Sweden, who are obviously can be NATO members, have all necessary steps to be NATO members, and you have maybe Turkey or Hungary, who is for now delaying that. And for NATO, it's probably problem to have Bosnia and Herzegovina with 3 members of presidency, which one giving the order and medal to the Putin to be member of NATO. But for me personally and my political party is important in the future to be member of NATO alliance, but to have good cooperation with NATO. Because if we know that NATO base is in Bosnia, that you have right to be in Bosnia and help our armed force, that means that we think about peaceful future. And in Bosnia, nobody talks about security regarding to European Union. It's like when you are talking about better economy, future, education and everything, you're thinking about EU. But when you are talking about peace and future of peaceful Bosnian region, there are people thinking about NATO. And we have obvious problem because maybe 30% of our population, if you have survey, they don't want to be a member of NATO because everything what happened after bombing the Serbia and everything, they are connected with Serbia on that question, and they officials and the political leaders says when Serbia want to be part of NATO, we will be also part of NATO. But Brandon said Serbia now have more exercise and everything with NATO than every other country in the region. But when we are talking about security, is primarily NATO, economy, education, social care, healthcare, and everything. That is EU topic.
But just to add regarding Serbia, I think nowadays EU delegation in Belgrade also has a defense attaché.
Okay. Unfortunately, we have to stop now, but I would thank you all for coming, and I don't have time now to speak for longer, but I would conclude that what we need and what has been learned and the step forward is more regional cooperation, more visibility from the EU, and more advocacy from the EU member states regarding the EU enlargement, then more support for regional initiatives and civil society. So that's my conclusion. But thank you very much, and thank you for our speaker. It's been lovely having you in Finland and you as well. Thank you.